Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as it has been an action-packed NFL news slate today, and sort of under the radar is going the fact that the Pittsburgh Steelers are making a change at quarterback where they are planning on starting Russell Wilson this upcoming week in the team's game against the Jets. Sort of caught me off guard. This is something that, at least in the back of our heads, I feel like we knew that this was a possibility. The Steelers had never ruled that out, but they're not directly comparable situations, but I was thinking back to last year when they decided to go with Mason Rudolph over Kenny Pickett down the final stretch of the season. At that point, in different parts of the year right now, not directly comparable, but Mason Rudolph was helping the Steelers win games, and I thought that was, yes, he probably outplayed Kenny Pickett to some degree, but I don't think that Kenny Pickett was terrible. Maybe that's a hot take. I know not a lot of people agree with that. But point being, it was mostly, I thought, about the results of the wins and losses and putting the team in position to win, which Justin Fields has done for the most part this season, where they're off to a 4-2 start. Has he been perfect? Definitely not. But overall, this has been a pretty successful year for him. And for them to call on Russell Wilson in this situation, considering that the team is sort of rolling at this point, definitely caught me off guard. Now, it was Tom Pelissero of NFL Network was the one who initially reported on this. He said that Wilson is going to be getting the first team reps throughout this week to put him in position to be the starter for Sunday Night Football against the Jets. It hasn't exactly been confirmed of whether or not he will ultimately get the start. Tomlin also hasn't ruled out the idea of playing both quarterbacks at some point. And then an interesting quote from him where, according to Tom Pelissero here, in reference to moving away from Fields despite a 4-2 start, Tomlin said, quote, "You have to have your foot on the gas at all times," which I do respect as a mindset. It is early enough in the season. The Steelers do have a little bit of a cushion as well, for whatever it's worth, sitting at 4-2, to the point where they can't really afford, to some degree, to be entirely closed-minded on this. It should be, an open competition to some degree. Now, I personally don't agree with this decision at this current point, but again, it's hard for me to, say wholeheartedly you have gone 4-2 up to this point in the season. You have to stick with Fields. I don't think that it's quite that black and white. I personally would have started with Fields based off of what I've seen from him playing football, but it's also hard for me as somebody who is just watching these games on TV and, keeping up with the practice things, but someone who's not actually in the building. I think it's hard to definitively say on the other end of it that this is the wrong decision. Now, again, this doesn't sound like definitively Wilson is 100% locked into starting this week, or that moving forward he will absolutely be the starter for the Steelers from this point out in the season. Because I do think the fact that both of these players are in their first season with the Steelers organization actually makes balancing this back and forth a little bit easier when you're talking about a young quarterback in his first or second year and you yank him out of the starting lineup, sort of like a Bryce Young situation. I think that transition to sort of then getting Bryce Young back under center and hopefully, having him grow along the way to becoming the franchise starting quarterback again is a little bit unrealistic. As for Fields and Wilson, they both knew that they were going to be sharing this quarterback room together and that it was going to be contested. And in order to, hold on to the job, you were going to have to, you would have to get to the point where it's not even an option. And Justin Fields, while he's played well, and I think he provides a lot of value for this Steelers offense, there have been moments of slippage and such, and Justin Fields is still a young quarterback that especially, the reason he's not in Chicago right now is because there were too many of those lapses that kind of forced the Bears' hands to some degree to pass on a quarterback in 2 consecutive years with the number 1 overall pick. And, I do, like I mentioned, I do think that I like Justin Fields better as the starting quarterback for the Steelers. I am not high on Russell Wilson at this point in his career. He will probably go down as a Hall of Famer when it's all said and done. But at this point in his career, I'm not sure quite what he provides that Justin Fields doesn't. Now, if there were one area where I were to be, I'd say the most critical of Justin Fields this season is that there has been a lot of inconsistency for Fields when throwing over the middle of the field. And that is sort of an element that has been, you could argue, a little bit handicapping. Now, overall, Fields is taking some deeper shots down the field. We've seen, especially as of the past few weeks, that he has been connecting on some of these downfield throws. But when you look at the Steelers' offense right now, I don't love their offensive line. It's something that I've been pretty passionate about, this entire year. And gonna double check here what pass block win rate looks like for them. I don't think it's good. It is 24th as of, heading into week 7. And I think that a lot of it is because of the fact that the offensive line, frankly, a lot of inexperience on the line. I don't know how great some of the players in particular are. Not that we need to run through offensive line index at this current moment, but I think it's a little bit of a shaky group. They have been doing a good job running the ball, though, and I don't know if Fields is posing enough of a passing threat to sort of open up that run game quite to the extent that the Steelers are maybe hoping for. Now, the flip side of that is the fact that Fields does have the mobility where he can lean into that rushing attack, and you look at the way that the Steelers use him, he has been doing a lot of damage on the ground up to this point in the year, and you look at this past start against the Raiders where overall I thought he was pretty good. It's not like the passing numbers were outstanding for him, but a lot of moments where you see him and the value that mobility brings, where he finishes the game with 59 yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns. It's not, out of this world necessarily, but he leans into the brand of football that maybe the Steelers are best suited for in prioritizing that run game, where, they're running speed options with him on 3rd and short. He's able to break a couple scrambles on, 2nd and long situations to either pick up the first altogether or make it a 3rd and short. There were a couple instances like that. There was one play in particular, as I sort of relate this back to the offensive line, where it was late in the first quarter, where they called a play, starting right tackle for the Steelers, Broderick Jones, clearly just did not know what the play was, just sort of took 2 steps out upfield and stood there and didn't touch anybody. It allowed Max Crosby to get a free rush off of that end, and Justin Fields immediately recognizes that and just scrambles up the middle for a 14-yard gain. Those are things that I don't think Russell Wilson will have the same capabilities of. In his career, he's been known to be able to use his legs as well. I'm just not sure if it has, if he has that same, I would say pretty confidently, he does not have the same speed as Justin Fields at this point in their respective careers. And I don't know. It's going to be interesting. When you think about what Wilson could do to sort of elevate this offense to a next level, it's the throwing the ball over the middle of the field, which Fields really hasn't been great at. He should have had an interception in this past game in the red zone where he tried to go over the middle and he threw it right into the hands of Raiders linebacker Divine Diablo. Now that play ends up getting wiped off the board because of a roughing the passer penalty, but it was a poor decision and a poor throw while he was under pressure, so he ends up getting away with that at least. But, you have moments where Fields has had a little bit of trouble throwing over the middle to some degree. He had a pick in, I'm trying to think what game it was exactly as well. It was, I can double check this on the fly here because it was the game that he ended up hitting Calvin Austin for the game-winning touchdown. A lot of these games sort of meshing together. I believe it was that Chargers game in particular where he had an interception in that one as well, where he was trying to look over the middle of the field and just was not a great decision, ended up getting popped up there. So, again, it's not like Fields is flawless, but I think ultimately when you talk about this conversation, it's not so much the level of play and quite that. I think that Fields and Wilson ultimately are on a similar tier, if not the same tier, in terms of what level of quarterback are they. I think at this point it's about evaluating who is the better fit for what the Steelers can currently run. And it's going to be very interesting to see Fields if he does, Wilson, if he does get the start this Sunday, what he's able to do with his opportunity. Because at this point, I would imagine that the leash is probably pretty short for Wilson. That, like I mentioned at the top of this segment, as of right now, the Steelers being 4-2 and being in a wild card position, it almost does give the Steelers a little bit of a benefit of not having to lock themselves into any current position. I think that in the next few weeks is when they are going to 100% have to know. And Tomlin still has not named an official starting quarterback for the Steelers this upcoming season. It's about what they can do from here. And Wilson is probably going to have some chances to win it in these coming weeks. Now, a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of the defenses that they're playing. The New York Jets are in Sunday Night Football this week. All eyes are going to be on him. This is probably going to be an extremely watched football game. I feel like one of the highest viewed, we're probably in for one of the higher viewed primetime games at this upcoming weekend, with Wilson starting for the Steelers, Davante Adams being traded to the Jets. So it'll be an interesting one there. Then it's a game against the New York Giants, whose defense is also playing pretty well for the most part. Then a bye week, you have Washington and Baltimore. And I think probably, ideally, by that week 9 bye week, you have to know, I think, at least coming out of week 11 against the Ravens. But again, we'll see how the Steelers decide to play this, as we are going to take one last final break, but before we do so, I want to address a comment here from Anthony Manzano saying, with this trade for Davante Adams, for me, I feel like it signals at the Jets don't really think that receiver that recently drafted from Ohio State as a number 1, probably in reference here to Garrett Wilson. I am a believer in Garrett Wilson. I think he is a very good player. I think that also, though, you have seen Wilson and Rodgers sort of struggle to fully get on the same page at times this year. And I think that relationship has improved over the course of these past few weeks. And Wilson ultimately, I think, is, at the very top of the league in terms of receptions at this point. I can, double check myself on that. I don't want to be talking out of the side of my head here. But, in terms of receptions, Wilson is second, and he is number 1 by 9 in terms of targets. So that's wide receiver 1 production, especially, with a couple, 20-plus yard receptions and, a few touchdowns in there as well. But I think that the Jets are also at a point where it's kind of do or die for them this season. Maybe you get Aaron Rodgers for next season as well. I think that Wilson is going to have a very bright future in front of him as a wide receiver, and he's probably going to get paid as a wide receiver 1 when he's ultimately eligible. But as of right now, Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers, yeah, they haven't played together for a couple of seasons. I trust that there's enough experience there in terms of the relationship that they have that he is going to just be that much better. And I think he can help Garrett Wilson along the way as well. But again, let us know what your thoughts are in the comment section, as it's been a lot of New York on the show today, and that is going to carry into our final segment, as we're going to be looking at the MLB playoffs, where last night we saw 2 New York teams come out on top again, as the New York Mets and New York Yankees won their respective games in the championship series prior to the World Series. So we're going to be diving into each of those games and talk about where these teams stand, where these series stand after the first couple games. So we're going to be diving into all of that. But before we do so, we are going to take our final break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.